It's well known that I have soured on the American civil rights movement. The NAACP has become increasingly bizarre. They pursue social justice for themselves. They want and allege that America cannot live up to its own principles, and then say that America has betrayed them whenever America tries to live up to these principles. It's really it's dirty infighting with the unions. It doesn't make any sense. They don't even try to make any sense. I'll try to make sense for you because the civil rights movement does have a purpose. Um, there's an old refrain: "State ways can't change folk ways." Now, what that means is that inborn cultural bias has the power, not America's principles, not the principles of free speech, not the principles of fact checking, not the principles of paying somebody what they're worth, not the principles of not poaching other people, stealing from them, not the principles of consensual romance, not the principles of laws between nations, treaties, effective enforcement of legal norms, but rather the hatreds, the grudges, the slanders, the gossip, the violence, the cruelty, the manias. Folkways, stateways can't change folkways is an old saying. It's sometimes attributed to the violence of the KKK when black people stood up for themselves. And no matter whether you change the laws to allow black people to vote, the folkways won't tolerate it. But that's only one of its meanings. The point is that what the black um, collective franchise, the heritage of Negro intelligentsia, has gone after. It's the voodoo of the cultural idea of globalism, extending their power base to a great folklore in the sky that includes the African ancestors and all of the begrudgments of the Noam Chomsky says are due to America's um, foreign policy jingoism. You know, the folkways of Hollywood and huge mega epics of black people beheading while the white in protection of their tribes when the colonialists arrived to enslave them. I mean, it's all very nice. But the point is that there are certain principles that have to be adhered to. And it doesn't matter if you're white and struggling with white, or you're black struggling with white, or you're black struggling with black. Most of the struggles that are going on in the world pertain to the principles of issues of proper conduct between people, responsible adulthood, being up against poachers, people who don't care, folkways, in other words. And there's a lot of black folkways that laugh in the face of stateways all the time. And to deny this is to deny the struggle rooted in the effort to bring public education to the world, to bring the principles of the American Library Association, to bring the dignity of research, community colleges, and universities, make knowledge available to the world. In the sense that Russia is an antagonist of the United States, some of it is moral antagonism and persecution of people who simply think differently. And that's a long-standing problem. But, the Russians are much too reasonable when it comes to being upfront about foreign policy and engaging in dialogue and being diplomatic enforcers of the peace for this situation to have been necessary. There are people in my life who have been pieces of never step for as long as I have known them. And they're incapable, grossly incapable of being anything but pieces of never step, who seem to love doing nothing more than to hurt other people, especially innocent people. And they're all hopping, jumping at the hop and holler about the folkways that are being besieged by the Russian stuff now. And since I don't know that much about Russia, I'm inclined to think that some of this is American pieces have never stepped doing what American pieces have never stepped do. This does not turn me into somebody who turns on America's principles. To the contrary, I believe that the idea that bias is deeply enculturated in American folkways needs to be addressed. I know it's very serious. For example, you go to a landlord, the landlord lies to you. He sits and mouths the lies that landlords lie to dissenters who are being poached by alien aggressors. Denies, no, the police have never put surveillance equipment in your home. No, no. So I've talked to educators, no, no, we didn't knowingly implant something in your brain to keep you out of school so you could be experimented on by psychiatrists from Israel. No, no, we didn't do that. No, which is a lie, but the bias is there. You go to a judge. No, we didn't tell our allies and the Bar Association not to represent you when your loved one was raped and you were castrated over a word game that was being circulated as gossip by the people who held you in custody, refusing to allow you to go to school, secretly in contact with your ex fiance and her husband, and lying about it to your face so that they would have access to you, blocking your way from school. The judges say, no, no, we're not going to self-review on a matter like that. It's bias. It's cold-blooded bias. There's a scene in Anne Rand's The Fountainhead, which made its way around the ship during World War II. My father said it was printed in 1943. And it got aboard the San Jacinto, and everybody read it. And it made sense to most of them. This was a battle for principles. It was hard to stand up for principles. It was hard to identify principles. Even people who lived in the United States had to struggle to identify the meaning of our principles. They weren't just a given. They weren't just something that was handed to you on a silver platter. They certainly weren't folkways. They weren't necessarily stateways either. They were something we had to sort out and try to improve our folkways and improve our stateways. But the principles were dialogue oriented, fair play, social justice. The civil rights movement was deeply in keeping with these principles. So, what's the scene in the Fountainhead I refer to here? Why did I bring it up? Steve Mallory says, I don't want to meet you, Rourke. I like your buildings too much. And Rourke says, well, what if I measure up to them? Because Mallory says, I'll just be sick. I know I'll just be sick when I meet you. I don't want to be sick anymore. I liked your buildings. As soon as I meet you, I'm going to be sick. And Howard Rourke says, what if I measure up to my principles? Mallory says, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. We don't have a society where the people who measure up to the principles. It doesn't happen. The people who built foundations like the Ayn Rand Society, Libertarian Society, around Ayn Rand, are weak-kneed, simpering, malicious, stupid people. It doesn't happen. You understand? It doesn't happen. When Robert Fripp came around, he was talking about how he tuned his guitar, his plectrum fingers, and all this stuff. He was hiding a swastika. He was hiding blah, 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 Blovius mysticism. He was the very opposite of the modernist that he portrayed himself as. He was using the principles of modernism, the principles of the West, the principles of civilization, specifically to subvert them with evil intent. It doesn't happen. People don't live up to what they're supposed to live up to. It does not happen. Bias exists on every single level: federal, state, municipal, and on the level of peers. You're going to find bias in Phi Theta Kappa of the community college and the honors programs of the community college, and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Massachusetts Review, at Gallaudet University for the Deaf and the Deaf Crazies are one of the most solemn violators of my rights as a human being you can find. They laugh at the way that I was tortured. Hollywood comes down on me with the most bizarre and shiftless crazies they can find. People from like Oliver Stone and Clint Eastwood. Oliver Stone made the film about JFK with people he knew were involved in the murder of JFK. He knew all about that script that had been planted on my house. He knew that Cyril Wecht was involved in it. This is Hybridzania. It's Hybridzania, and it's working its way in towards our atom bombs. We don't have sane, effective principles guiding us. We have this bizarre cloud of folkways, and and gargoyles come up out of the bog, calling themselves Trump. So it's a really serious cultural slide, and black people have nothing to contribute. They have nothing to say. Their manhood has been sapped away. I mean, what kind of manhood would focus horrors and lies and eccentric, berserk struggles of consciousness on a deaf person who is recovering from neurotrauma? It's ridiculous because I'm white. Yeah, because Spike Oldby can't just be in one of his films because I'm not yeah, because New York already has figured out what they want to do with that what you know, it's atrocious. But even if the whole world flipped and we surrendered to our enemies, so okay, we're just going to throw the whole thing in Russia's lap and let them sort it out, we'd still be back where we started, fighting for principles of the right to free speech, fighting principles to figure out from the experimental method what the best medicines are, figuring out how to mobilize society for eco schools so that they become conscientious gardeners. Still have a nationwide conversation about driving less because of what's going on with the climate control situation. So buzz all the way from me. I mean it. Buzz all the way from me. I really do not want anything to do with you.